Okay, 1 o'clock. Good day, everybody, and welcome to the National Hazard Mitigation Association webinar on post-Helene implications for hazard mitigation. My name's Mike Sprayberry. I'm the Senior Advisor for Emergency Management for Haggerty Consulting, and it's my honor to serve on the Board of Directors for the National Hazard Mitigation Association, or as we refer to it, NHMA. NHMA's mission is to enhance community resilience by providing resources, training, and support for hazard and risk mitigation practitioners. You can learn more about NHMA and how you can become a member at https://nhma.info. For me, when I just put it in my search engine is nhma.info, it takes you right there. Before we get started, we want to thank Millersville University and Dr. Seppi Yalda and her team for being great partners in hosting this webinar. This webinar is part of our continuing series addressing contemporary challenges and improvements to disaster risk reduction and hazard mitigation practices at the state and local level. NHMA is a cooperating technical partner with FEMA's Risk Map program. This webinar is supported by a FEMA grant under that program. I also want to thank today's speakers for taking the time to share their knowledge and experience with everybody on here. We got about 140 so far. You will hear from Laura Dewey, the Florida SHMO. She works for FDM. You'll hear from Doug Bellamo, the Vice President at AECOM, and Steve McGugan, the North Carolina Emergency Management SHMO. At this time, we'll go to Laura to get her to tell us a little bit about herself. Laura, you have the floor, ma'am.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Mike and NHMA for inviting me to be on this panel today. My name is Laura Dewey. I'm the Chief of Mitigation and the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at the Florida Division of Emergency Management. I've been here for over 8 years now. I started as a mitigation planner and worked my way up, and now I'm the Chief of Mitigation. So thank you for having me join today.
Thank you, Laura. On to you, Doug.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike and NHMA. It's good to be here. I am a vice president within AECOM's water resources business line. I'm very focused on flood hazard identification, risk assessment, flood risk resilience, those kinds of things. Prior to joining AECOM, I was with the Army Corps of Engineers. I was a senior technical advisor for flood risk management across a variety of their programs, including the levee safety program, their dam safety program. And then before joining the Corps, I was with the Federal Emergency Management Agency for about 18 years. I was the director of the Risk Analysis Division and oversaw mapping for the National Flood Insurance Program, operations of the mitigation planning program, dam safety, a variety of other things. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Doug. And to you, Steve.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Like Laura, thanks for inviting us to be here. My name is Steve McGugan. I'm the Assistant Director for Hazard Mitigation in North Carolina Emergency Management. Started out many years ago, first in the military, then after the military, worked in the civilian sector, both in a construction company and then for one of the independent-owned utilities here in North Carolina before coming to North Carolina Emergency Management about 5.5 years ago. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. Okay, before we really get started, here's a few housekeeping notes. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists a series of questions. When you have a question based on what their answer is, please type it into the chat. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can when we finish with the questions with our panelists. Also, please make sure to keep your audio muted. With that, let's get started. We're going to start with Laura first. So Laura, Florida has a unique methodology for allocating HMGP funds. What are the benefits of your processes, ma'am?
Yeah, so we have an administrative rule that says that we allocate our funds to the most impacted communities first. So we have a tiered system. So, you know, say you have County A and County B, and County A received, you know, 75% of the damages in terms of PA and IA funds, and County B received, you know, 25%. That's how we would allocate our HMGP funds as well. And we do this because it gives the counties that really, you know, were impacted, a chance to take advantage of those funds, because what we noticed many decades ago, was that, you know, some of the bigger counties who were maybe more, afforded more resources, they had a lot of projects shelf ready, and they could apply for these funds. They had the match ready to go. And so they would apply and get those HMGP funds. And then the counties that were impacted maybe weren't able to use those funds as much. So we've been using this process for a long time, and it works here for us because you know, these counties that are impacted are, you know, guaranteed a certain amount of funds as long as they submit those, you know, applications up to, you know, their allocation. We recommend that they oversubmit for their allocation, so that, you know, if they have projects that aren't eligible or, you know, get withdrawn from their community for whatever reason, that they have projects to kind of fill that gap. And then we have, you know, we kind of fund tier 1 and 2 that way, and then tier 3 goes into statewide. So if there are funds left over, we make sure that we have backup projects essentially from across the state. So for us, it's been helpful to make sure that we have enough projects to submit to FEMA to make sure we're using all of those funds.
So for those counties that are most impacted, and if they have a problem with having match funding, how do you address that?
So in Florida, we do not pay match for HMGP. I think we did many decades ago, but we don't right now. So typically they're up to on their own for coming up with the match, whether that's, you know, we work with our Florida Commerce for CDBGDR,
Right,
or we also in 2023, the Florida legislature did give us some funding for fiscally constrained communities, because Hurricane Idalia in 2023 hit a lot of fiscally constrained counties, and they were not going to be able to take advantage of HMGP. And so we had to fight for that. But the legislature did end up giving us some funding to help them with their match. So that was
right.
great. But typically, that's not a guarantee. So it's kind of a, you know, great if you get it, but don't count on it.
Right, don't count on it, but good that precedent's been set so that the legislature made sure that Florida had skin in the game. All right, thanks, Laura. On to you, Doug. So, Doug, what are some of the biggest hurdles in making resilience happen before and after disasters?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest hurdles that I've seen, and it's not ubiquitous, but in some places, there's kind of a fog when it comes to, you know, resilience. The first question comes, well, what do you want to make resilient? And if you don't have an answer to that, it can be difficult to prioritize and really focus. And the other question is, you know, what resilience to what? To flooding, IT security, other natural hazards. And so I think one of the best things you can do to kind of lift that fog is to really create a solid vision for your community or your business. Really understand where you want to be and when you want to get there, so that you can really easily answer those questions of, you know, what do I want to make resilient coming out of a disaster? What do I want to make resilient before disaster strikes? and having that vision is just critical. I don't think you get to resilience without knowing where you want to be. And so I think that's paramount. The other thing I would say too is time and money. You know, I'd like to say, you know, before disasters, people have a lot of time and no money. And after the disaster, they have a lot of money and no time. And so the real way to handle getting past those things is to use your time wisely for the disaster. So if you don't have that vision, create it, identify where your vulnerabilities are, identify some actions you could take if you had money, and then be prepared after the disaster to take those actions, which means having conversations with people. You really can't go into a community or a part of your business and say, hey, we're going to change things now that this disaster struck. You need to really have a plan and talk to them ahead of time. So you can do a lot of that pre-disaster, even though you may not have resources. And then post-disaster, of course, you do get funding for resilience, you get funding for repairs. And so the best way to take advantage of that is to use your time wisely prior to the event, leverage the event to forward your vision toward a more resilient community or business, and then use the resources that come post-disaster to get that done. So I think there's lots of things folks can do, but really understanding where you want your community to be, what you want to see is becoming more resilient over time is a really critical first step. And then, of course, using your time wisely and using the event as an opportunity to advance your vision is key.
Right. So I think, a common thread between what both you and Laura have said is to basically, be thinking about, what you need prior to a disaster, have projects ready in the event, when a disaster strikes, have on the shelf projects ready to go. Irrelevant, it's, regardless of, how much money you have a good plan in place so that you'll be able to execute the funding that you get when a disaster comes. Okay, over to you, Steve. What strategy is North Carolina Hazard Mitigation focusing on to assist both individual homeowners and long-term recovery efforts, especially as it relates to resiliency?
So I think the big thing that we've moved on to focusing here with HMGP, we have always used it as a way to assist our homeowners. We have focused, of course, heavily on acquisitions, elevations, trying to get those homeowners that either won't move out of the floodplain, at least up out of the water, or those homeowners that have finally figured out that's not the place to live and help them move out of the floodplain. In this one, while we're using that same strategy for those homeowners impacted, especially after Hurricane Helene, the other piece that we're doing is focusing on a lot of the brick projects that weren't picked up in previous rounds of brick, as well as those that were submitted for this year's brick, trying to get those projects in based upon the large amount of dollars that we've been given. So whereas in the past we've mostly focused on homes, now we're actually focusing a lot of the HMGP dollars to go after those resiliency projects that communities have. And we're asking those communities that have been impacted, what projects did they have that maybe they didn't think about that they can use to be able to put projects in now so that we can get them in the pipeline and get them constructed while we have this abundant funding that has come down based on Tropical Storm Helene.
So you're looking at stuff like water and wastewater facilities and
Yes, sir. We've got projects right now. In fact, we've talked to like Riverbend. I'm currently working with them on a wastewater treatment plant, $18 million plant that they want to be able to do now, and it's shovel ready. They just need the funding, so we'll be putting that in. We've talked to Asheville. One of the impacts for Asheville is that they had a filtration system based on normally clean water, but due to all the landslides, that water became very, very highly sedimented, and now the filtration system doesn't work as well. So a resiliency project would be a bypass tunnel so that when something like this happens in the future, you could bypass it, go to a heavy water treatment versus just the filtration system, and then you could keep your water quality up at a higher quality by being able to rotate back and forth. So trying to look at different projects like that as we look at how to recover from this storm.
Yeah, that sounds pretty exciting to me, Hazmat 6. And so Marie in the chat put down and said it's important to have a good a hazard mitigation plan in good standing, which we all know is important. And I think North Carolina and Florida are both enhanced plan states. Is that correct still? And so proud of you guys for not only achieving that, but for maintaining that. Means so many millions of dollars more that you're going to be getting, and with the 20% rather than the 15%. All right, back over to you, Laura. Florida has been allowed to manage HMGP funds under program administration by states. Pass. Other states have been interested in pursuing it. Is it worth it?
So I think this is an interesting topic because for us in Florida, we are getting so much funding that if we had to go through the region like we would without pass, I think it would take a lot longer to get our projects. Now that's not me, slamming FEMA or Region 4. I'm pretty sure Region 4 has the most disasters and the most amount of funding right now. So they would need a lot more staff, and I don't know that that's something that is even feasible. So for us, pass is definitely worth it. We don't, I've heard other states argue that, they don't get anything for it. You don't, with an enhanced plan, you get the extra 20% or the extra 5% like you mentioned. But with pass, you don't really get a lot of benefits. There are some with the ability to request more management costs up front. But for us, it's worth it because otherwise we would be at a standstill, right? So, I mean, I've got over 600 projects right now that are that have been awarded and not in progress. And I've got another 1,000, I think, in the queue that are being reviewed and working through the process. So it would be too much our projects would be, in the FEMA black hole forever. So for us, it's definitely worth it because we're able to move our projects faster. We have our processes down. We, are continuously improving them. FEMA does monitoring once a year of 10% of our projects. And so we're able to make sure that we're keeping up to, the right standards. And we're, like I said, continuously improving our processes and making sure we're doing the right things. But it just wouldn't be feasible to not be pass for us right now. That being said, I don't disagree that, maybe a smaller state or a state with fewer disasters, it may not make sense to go pass, but if you are starting to get a lot more disasters, a lot more funding in HMGP, I do think it's worth it. Particularly, and there's options, and maybe Steve might want to join in on this, but there's, I think, options for, you don't have to do all of the different allowable activities. There are certain things you can do. You could do certain things for certain project types. And so I think that's something that maybe North Carolina has been looking into. And I do think it's worth it when you have the right team, when you have the staffing at your level, at the state level, and when you have a lot of projects. So.
Right. So it sounds to me that it expedites the process by giving the state more authority to run the program.
Certainly.
Okay. All right. On to you, Doug. What should state or local governments consider if they want to improve their resiliency?
Yeah, sure. So, a few things there. I know a lot of folks consider, resiliency a bit of a buzzword, but it actually does have some characteristics that I think define it and make it easy to implement, easier, I should say, not easy, easier to implement at the state and local level. So there's four typical characteristics. One is strength, and quite frankly, state and local governments hold the keys to how strong their communities are built because they have the authority for deciding how to build. This would be like building codes, those kinds of things, and where to build. The federal government doesn't get involved in those decisions. There may be promotions through federal programs and the like, but ultimately those decisions are made at the state and local level. And so if you really want to build your strength, which is part of resilience, think about the rules you have in place for how to build and where to build. And this would include everything from residential to commercial structures, but also equally importantly, the standards around your lifelines, sewer, water, power, communications, those kinds of things. So strength is a big part of it. And building code decisions and land use decisions are key to that characteristic of resilience. The other is another one is preparedness, obviously, training, exercises, being ready for any kind of disaster. It's really easy sometimes for us to get to thinking, well, we had a flood, so we need to be prepared for floods. But the reality is, there are a multitude of hazards that communities face, and so being rational about which ones and making sure you've got the right police, first responders, and others equipped and ready to respond is really also key. So I would encourage folks to think about training and tabletop exercises and making sure you've got the proper skilled staff and equipment in place. So preparedness is the other characteristic. The third is recovery. A lot of times recovery, the mantra becomes bring it back to normal. And I would say that's par for the course. I think if you really want to be resilient, you have to recover better than you were before. Otherwise, you'll just continue that damage, rebuild, damage cycle. And as terrible as disasters are, they do present opportunities to spiral out of that damage, rebuild, damage cycle. And so not just recovering quickly from events, but recovering stronger from those events, I think is key. So we talked a little earlier about having, recovery plans, almost pre-scripted or negotiated changes in place, I think is really key. So strength, preparedness, quick recovery. And then my favorite characteristic of resilience is actually adaptation. And I think Steve hit on this a little with the example he mentioned in North Carolina with the wastewater treatment plant. They are obviously looking at ways to adapt the way they treat their water using a filtration system prior to the event, but understanding after Helene that they need an alternative system on occasion, and so they need to adapt their facilities. And I think having that adaptive capacity is what's going to differentiate resilient communities in the future. You can make them stronger, you can be prepared, you can recover quick, and you can recover more fully. But if you're not prepared to adapt to changing conditions, be it climate change, be it changes in science and technology, be it changes in culture, values, and attitudes, changes all around us. And so that adaptive capacity is really critical. Staying the course when your environment changes is a recipe for continued pain. So I would say if you're going to focus on one of those four characteristics, I would definitely focus on making sure you've got the mechanisms in place to adapt over time as conditions and information change.
Doug, you used a word called rational in your answer. And I agree with what you're saying. Being able to adapt is really, it's critical. But in our state here in North Carolina, we're actually regressing in, adoption of building codes, right? And so uh, it's bewildering to see And so I wonder if you have any advice, for folks at the local level or the state level or really anywhere. How do we, how do we, in an intentional way, ensure that our elected representatives know just how important having solid building codes are? I mean, without the right kind of building codes, we keep developing and with the severe weather that we continue to have, um, it ends up putting us in a bad spot. And so, and not only that, we become ineligible for brick grants and things like that because we don't meet the standard. And so, what kind of messaging and how would you do that? I always found that to be a challenge when I was a director for emergency management.
Yeah, there's a really strong business case for building codes. There's a variety of reports. NIST has reports out, FEMA has reports out on the long-term economic benefits of having building codes in place in terms of loss avoidance. I think there's also some really good, what I would call um, indirect benefits to having building codes. I think it's important for communities in order to sustain themselves to have their citizens feel safe. This notion that building codes increase costs, I mean, it is true, but it's marginal. I think those costs are, 1%, 2% of the construction costs. And businesses and people tend to want to be in safe communities. And I don't think they view building codes as necessarily a bad thing. So I think there's a strong both moral and business case opportunity to make for building codes and land use. And I would also say this too, after a disaster, sometimes the lack of codes becomes very apparent, or the lack of enforcement of codes becomes very apparent. And it's really easy, I think, for communities to say, look, we can't adopt this now because we're in the middle of a disaster. Now, I would ask that they rethink that for the disaster. And if it becomes politically difficult to adopt a new code during the recovery process, I would say adopt it for your next disaster during the disaster you're recovering from. In other words, say, okay, it's too hard now, but we're not going to give up. We're going to pass this local ordinance and we're going to strengthen our building codes and we're going to waive it for recovery on this disaster, but it will be in place for the next disaster so that people have time to adapt and they understand what the new codes are going into the future. Just don't give up, don't say we're throwing that in the too hard pile. Find creative ways to make
Right.
it happen.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Steve, HMGP has always been known as a long, slow program. How's North Carolina trying to change this perception by compressing the project timeline and increasing recovery efforts to those affected by Hurricane Helene?
So as all of us know, it does take time to move projects through, even to what Laura said, one reason why they're passed, and I'll come back address the pass piece. But as a state, how we approached, especially the efforts after Helene, previously we had always waited for the counties to do the intake, get the applications put together at their level, send it up to the state level. The state puts it all together, and you're trying to fight for that 12-month mark to get your applications in. And 9 times out of 10, it's a big dump on FEMA. And then it's a long process to get however many applications reviewed and approved, and then to get the work out to the communities. So in this case, for Hurricane Helene, we totally reversed that. We put a lot more on the state staff, and we started within literally 45 days of the event. We started intake in the counties with the state staff. So we went to each county, we set up shop from anywhere from 4 days to 1 day to 4 days, some 2 weeks. And we had state staff in the DRCs, had tables set up, had survivors coming up to us, filling out an application, providing them an address so they could email their pictures of their homes to us. pulled up their tax card, pulled up their floodplain map, did everything that we needed with them sitting there, and basically built their application on the fly, sitting at the table. And then as we completed all that, we did that for approximately 8 weeks. We're now back in-house, back in office, and we're taking those applications. We're putting all the final touches on them, and we've already started sending applications back out to the county so the counties can go ahead and sign them, and we will start submitting them. So right now we're already a little over 90 days after the event, and realistically, we have 3 applications for 3 counties already ready to go in, basically supporting 90 individual structures. And as those start rolling in, the second piece that we did to help increase that time of getting them back is we've been doing a parallel review with FEMA. So we have our FIT team member sitting there in office with us as we're developing the application. They've been reviewing it. We've sent it to EHP simultaneously. They've been reviewing the homes. In fact, EHP a lot of times has been going out and gathering photos for us on the ground from the JFO. So we got the applications. They've already got the photos. They've already reviewed them and approved them. And we've also done a memorandum to FEMA looking at multiple ways that we're going to look at these homes that are damaged, since so many were damaged due to the catastrophic nature of the flooding that were outside the floodplain. We applied extra rules that we were looking at to include that basically, even if it's an X zone property or a shaded X zone property, but it got flooded, if they want to be elevated, we at least lift the first floor to the flood elevation, the flooding that it received based on the high water mark. Or if, of course, the home's been damaged and destroyed, it's an automatic basically approval because there's nothing there. So we've done all of that in parallel with FEMA. So realistically, as these projects go in, I've already got recommendations from EHP and Tech on these projects. It will basically just finish a programmatic review, go to LPN, and then be awarded. And then on the backside of that, we also have the state centric. For those that don't understand state centric, basically as a state, not only do we build the application, but we also do the work. We do all the contracting. And normally you don't go to contracting until you get an approval letter back from FEMA. Well, due to the parallel process that we're doing, as soon as that application goes into FEMA, it's also going out to contracting. So that means that the 30 days that we normally sit to wait on contracting to be done, we'll get our contracting bids back in. We'll be able to award the project once we get the award from FEMA in hand. So we just cut another 30 days out on getting the help back out to the people in the area. And so by doing all of these fast moving processes, instead of looking at right now 18 months getting first awards out the door and maybe getting work started on the ground, I expect to be purchasing homes, all those acquisitions starting in April, which would be less than 180 days after the event happened, that we have work going on. And finally, to large part about PASS, we're also working on PASS. PASS is a great thing. It would be good to have. There are parts that we can take advantage of. And again, we can do that through the acquisition process and a lot of the reviews that we can do internally to us. And that it's going to help be able to pick that speed up. I'm training a PASS team right now that can review applications. FEMA came down, did a technical review with the team, helped do the training on that piece. So it's getting us stood up so that as this year works through our timeline of being able to do applications, at some point we'll transition into PASS and again be able to start doing more internal reviews and get work turned out to the street faster. So right now, that's the 4 methodologies that we're doing to try to increase the speed of HMGP.
Steve, I gotta say that, you're getting a lot of positive responses here from what you've been talking about, some hearts and some clapping hands and stuff. But, that when you talk about the state-centric program, my chest starts swelling because, I'm really proud of the work that you've done there. And all the times that we had to brief that doggone program just to get it approved. And this is where it's paying off. So, just one more question. So, how many staff members do you have in hazard mitigation right now? And what type of staff are they? Just roughly.
So, I mean, if you break it down, grants development, right now I have 4 members, but we're also starting a contract up end of February that will bring on 20 contractors to help with all this grant, getting applications done. I have 10 project managers, and we're getting ready to bring on approximately 8 more. Some of that's going to come from actually Encore. Some of those folks that in the buyout program are going to transition. We'll look at those and transition them over to us. And then I have 7 engineers with another senior engineer we're getting ready to hire on that. It's an actual piece that we're getting done. We actually have a closeout section, which is 4 people. And, you know, with all of that total, we're about 38 personnel right now, sir.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Over back to you, Laura. Florida was hit with 2 major hurricanes in 2024, Helene and Milton. What's different about your approach to the HMGP and SWIFT current funds this time?
Yeah, so that lines up perfectly with what Steve just mentioned. I've been watching what he's been doing in North Carolina with the state centric and for years, and wanting to implement something similar here. And I had this grand plan of, building out this process, having everything, figured out. And I was going to build out this process over the next year or two. And then Helene and Milton hit. And I talked to my director and I said, I think we can do something similar, but I was planning to build this strategy over the next, year or two. And we ended up deciding to do it now. So it's been a busy couple months since Helene and Milton, and been relying a lot on Steve, and learning his process. And I think we're close to making something work here in Florida. So we are also moving to a similar model where instead of the locals having to do these projects themselves. And I've heard the feedback over the years from the locals that they don't have the capacity, even with the management costs that they get, to do onesie twosie or even dozens of elevation or mitigation, reconstruction or acquisition. They don't have the capacity to do it. They don't have the expertise. And so my locals here in Florida have been asking me to build this out as well. So it all kind of came together, and we are building a program called Elevate Florida. It's actually going to be launching in about a week. And we are going to have homeowners apply directly to us through an online portal. And we are going to contract directly with them, and then working with the local community as well. And then we'll be contracting directly with the construction vendors and all of that good stuff. So we're hoping that we can not only streamline the process this way, but also remove that burden from the local communities, because they want these projects. They want to help their residents. The residents are putting a lot of public pressure on the elected officials to do these projects. And typically these residential projects in Florida haven't been a priority over the last many years. Most counties and communities focus on infrastructure, critical facilities, things like that, retrofitting, wind retrofits, drainage projects. And so residents, we've had projects here and there, but nothing on a large scale. And so hopefully with this process and Elevate Florida, we're going to be able to do these on our own for the communities, so that they don't have to have this extra burden. We're going to be able to help residents. And because of our expertise with these applications and with FEMA, our good relationship with Region and the staff at the JFO, we're going to be able to process these applications faster than ever before. So we're using HMGP funds for that, some of our funds, and then we're also going to be using Swift Current funds. So we had Swift Current in 2023, and it's the process that we used last time we didn't find was effective, because I mean we just now got the RFIs for those projects that we submitted in this time last year. So we've been working really closely with FEMA region, JFO, and headquarters to come up with a process where we can do more of the work. So it's not really PAS, because you can't have PAS for FMA and Swift Current, but we're gonna be making sure that we're expediting and you know, like Steve mentioned, doing some of those parallel reviews with FEMA, EHP, and just trying to do everything we can to expedite these reviews and get these projects started. So this is a very new concept for us, and we're really excited to start this journey. It's gonna be a lot, but knowing that Steve and North Carolina have kind of they were kind of the trailblazers with this, and so we are right behind you guys in North Carolina. So we're really grateful to North Carolina, and Florida is definitely modeling our program after North Carolina's.
Well, I'm very proud of both of y'all. I mean, you know, you have the past program, and then North Carolina, the state centric. And, you know, actually, when we saw how CDBGDR worked and how they were able to basically procure contractors and get that done and then do the work, you know, for the homeowners via those contracts, it kind of turned on a light bulb in our heads. Why can't we do that for hazard mitigation and go ahead and get those contractors on board, and so that, you know, the counties and the municipalities don't have to worry about it, and because they are low capacity, I mean, they've got jobs to do. All right, thanks, Laura. Okay, over to you, Doug. In your opinion, how much risk is too much, and is there such a thing as too little risk?
Um, yeah, I think the first part's pretty straightforward. I think too much risk is when the risk taker can't afford the losses. If you're making a bet and you can't afford to pay out, if you come up empty-handed, then I think you've got too much risk on your hands. And I do think there is such a thing as too little risk. And I guess let's start by saying that I don't view risk as a four-letter word. I kind of view it as a byproduct of value. And so what you need to do from a risk management perspective is balance the risks you're taking with the rewards you're after. So that's all about a tolerance level. You know, how much are you willing to put on the table? Can you afford the loss? And what is it, what's the reward that you're going after? The complexities in risk management, I think, come in the system in which risks are monitored and tracked over time. So you may start out with a decent risk reward balance where the risk takers can afford the losses, they understand what's possible, and the risk winners, the folks who get the rewards, understand what those are all about, and so it's all equal and everything's fine. But then over time, you get these maybe opaque risk transfers where, say, all of a sudden some rewards are taken and the original risk takers back out and a new set of risk takers come on board, but they're not aware. And so I think the key to properly managing the risk is to really monitor it over time, analyze the risks, make sure everybody who's on the risk side of the equation understands they hold some, make sure they're in a position to handle those risks should they become real issues. And then also make sure the other side of the ledger understands who's getting the rewards from the risk taking, how much, what's in it for them, and try to balance that out. And really the key to all that is the risk assessments themselves and very effective risk communication. So just even taking, like, say, homeowners as an example, people will buy into a home. They'll say, well, it was built to code. They'll assume that their risk is near zero or zero. If they're out of the floodplain, they'll feel like they don't need insurance when in fact maybe they do, because they have more risk than they think they have. Maybe they live through a flood event and then they turn and sell the lot or sell the property and someone else takes it. And so these transfers are occurring all the time. And I think it's really imperative to make sure everybody understands the risks they're taking and the rewards that they could gain from taking those risks, and that they're prepared to deal with the losses should they occur.
Right. I always tell people when they ask me about if they should have flood insurance, I always tell them, or actually I ask them, I said, do you live in a place where it rains? And I said, well, yeah. I said, well, then you need flood insurance. And because even if you're not in a flood zone, I mean, flood insurance can be pretty cheap. We had a pilot program in North Carolina to where folks, it was only a few $1 million, but they were given flood insurance after we did some repairs on their homes after they got flooded out. And these are, of course, low to moderate income folks. And but it didn't go very far because we found out after the 2 years that we bought their flood insurance for, they just let it expire. They couldn't afford it. And so that's what Roy Wright always used to say.
Yeah.
Just can't make it affordable.
Yeah.
All right. So, Steve, over to you. And I would just remind everybody, if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or the questions and answers. And I'm going to stop here in a minute and we're going to try to get to all of them. So, Steve, what are the greatest challenges you believe will directly impact the program, and how are you positioning your office to overcome those challenges?
So I think when you start looking at the geopolitical world, some of those are where your greatest challenges are going to come from. We've already talked about it. You talked about codes a minute ago. If we're not updating codes, if codes aren't incorporated, especially higher codes are incorporated, you're just going to keep rebuilding and rebuilding, and you're never going to get to that resilient state. I think you also have the challenge of time that was mentioned earlier, because no matter how fast we want to make the program, people can and do get tired of waiting. And, there's just so many contractors, there's just so much that you can do at any given time. And the messaging has to be to folks that I know we might not be moving as fast as you want us to be, but we are coming. Please be patient and let us help you become more resilient in the long term. Don't withdraw from the program. I understand 3 years is maybe a long time before you see us to do your elevation, but let us get you elevated, because there will be another time when something comes, and if you're not elevated, you're going to be impacted. So, being able to make folks remember, being able to make folks understand that this program does matter, and it's going to have to be looked at as a long-term program. It's not a short fix. It's not a quick fix. It's a great fix if you're willing to put the effort into it. That's really where you've got to have a good messaging. You've got to be able to go out like today, talk to a city council, be able to tell them how to look at how these acquired properties can be used long-term, beneficial to the community. Don't just look at it that we've lost our tax base because we acquired properties. There's things you can do with that property that helps the community, that helps you long-term, that can become a critical, resilient project in the future. But don't just look at it as I'm losing tax base today. There's ways we can take advantage of it. So being able to stay on top of that messaging is what's going to be really critical to making the program successful long term.
Thank you, Steve. All right, we're about 10 minutes out from ending. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through here the chat first. And one of them says, does anyone have a sense as to how the recent federal funding freeze has impacted FEMA funding streams in practice? Aaron, HMGP Brick. Is anyone seeing funding interruptions? And what do you tell smaller, less resourced communities, clients who are concerned about being able to obtain reliable financial support to do hazard mitigation planning? So Laura, I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, I know that they've put a pause on that freeze, right? And I think they've extended that pause, the federal judge, but we can't predict the future. Um,
Yeah, we haven't seen any interruptions thus far. I mean, again, like you said, we don't know what's gonna happen. We're operating as if we're gonna continue to have funding available, and if there are changes to that, then we'll handle it at that time. In terms of specifically to hazard mitigation planning, um, we don't typically use a lot of grant funding in Florida for planning. I would say you can look to your local universities, the urban planning, land use type of degrees, emergency management, anything like that. But I would say look to interns, look to universities for because there's good kids there who need projects, and writing a plan or updating a plan would be very beneficial and further learning, I would say. So
yeah, I know y'all use Florida State a lot.
mhm.
You know, I've seen a ton of interns at the NEMA conferences. All right, both Florida and North Carolina are high capacity. Any advice for low capacity states? And Steve, we'll go there first with you and then back to you, Laura.
I think, I mean, it doesn't matter the state's capacity, it's the way you approach and be able to help your citizens. Um, you know, what I would say is lean on each other as states. You know, Laura has been a great partner for North Carolina. I've taken a lot of lessons from her, being able to talk through the past piece, being able to kind of hear how she's, built. They do a lot more at the local level, which allows them to do a lot more review at the state level. We don't have that capacity in our communities. Again, a lot of rural communities. So we do that effort for them, but being able to incorporate what she does at in the Florida level is what's been able to make us successful here. So, reach out to your federal, your different schmoes. Again, welcome anybody to give us a call and email us, and we'll be glad to talk to them about different strategies that you can use. And I think, strategy wise is being flexible with your strategies. You know, uh, one time it works maybe for this disaster or for a non-disaster application process. The next time it maybe works a different way. But being able to reach out and share those lessons learned with your fellow schmoes, your fellow states, is what's going to make your program better, and maybe see some ways you can do yours differently, just like we can do ours differently based on lessons learned.
Thank you, sir. All right, I'm going to go to you, Laura, for this one. How do you suggest going about the uninsurable area such as Florida with flood insurance, or potentially more applicable, California with regular homeowners insurance and fire protection?
So I mean, obviously, this is a problem nationwide, particularly Florida, I think Louisiana, California. I don't think there's one solution. I think it's a myriad of solutions, building the local and residential preparedness is one thing, because if they're not going to be able to be insured, then they need to have a plan for what they're going to do if they do get hit. For us in Florida, this is part of the reason why I wanted to do what we're doing now with Elevate Florida, because there are a lot of homes that, I mean, we have large insurers pulling out of the state. We have other programs in the state that are working to help. We have My Safe Florida Home, funded by the Florida legislature. And that's helping a lot of residents to be able to be insured. And then with Elevate Florida, our intention is to help, the projects that we work on to be insurable, and for residents to be able to afford their insurance. Because it's one thing to be insurable, but then you could be insured, but maybe you can't afford it. So I think making sure that the building stock is, the existing is, being mitigated, but then, I mean, we can just go right back to the building codes. Anything new needs to be built so that it can be insured, so that it is safe, so it is, a level of resilient, there's a level of resilience there right out the gate. But I mean, this is a continuing challenge. But I don't think that there's one good solution. I think
And
it's
no one
there's-
size fits all,
yeah,
right?
yeah, there's a lot to it to get us, statewide. I mean, we can only do so many projects with our funding, but when you piece together all the different funding sources and maybe over time we can really change the landscape.
Thank you. All right, we're down to just a couple of minutes left to go. So we're gonna begin our closeout here. On behalf of the National Hazard Mitigation Association, we thank all of you who attended here today for attending. It means a lot to us. We know you have busy lives and have plenty of demands on your daily schedule, so thanks for choosing to be here today. I really want to thank our speakers for being here. I learned a lot from all three of them, and I got to tell you, I've known them all three for a while, and so good folks. And if you run into them, they're always eager to help you. In fact, I would say great partners, right? So thank you again, Laura, Doug, and Steve. I want to thank Dr. Seppi Yalda again and Jason running our IT and the team at Millersville University for hosting it. If you want to rewatch this webinar, you can find a recording on our YouTube channel. You can also find the webinar linked on our website at nhma.info, NHMA info. On our website, you can also learn more about becoming a member or how to participate in one of our committees. We always want to get good folks at NHMA. There's also a survey that you'll find in the chat if you want to take a good survey. And then again, on behalf of the NHMA, I want to thank all of you, and you have a great rest of your day. This concludes our webinar. Y'all take care. Be safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.